Hello everyone, this is part 18 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Dear shithead, it's been so long since I've seen you now. I know it's only 10 months, but it feels like years. Kami, how mushy does that sound? I miss you. I know I'm not usually good with expressing my emotions, but it feels a bit easier when I write them down. I also want to know just how much you've grown both physically and training-wise, but I guess I'll see in a year, won't I? Infiltrating Sasori's organization was a bitch. The man is the most paranoid fucker I have ever met. I even had to cover up my curse mark with makeup so they wouldn't think I had any connections to that pedo. It worked though. I'm in the organization. It was weird at first. For a supposed S-ranked missing nin, the guy was a fucking moron. It only took me 2 months to work my way into his inner circle. I am now one of his trusted elite. I've been training hard as well, enough that the man himself thinks I'm too valuable for simple spy work. I am currently doing missions for the Akatsuki. How weird is that? Don't worry, it's nothing major or even related to their main goals, and I use every opportunity I get to fuck them over without drawing suspicion. I definitely feel like I'm getting stronger. No details yet, just something you'll have to see later. I want to know how you're doing, what you've been doing, who you've met. Just a friendly warning, if I come back and you've been with another girl, I'll rip your nuts off. Just for that though, I decided to give you something so you wouldn't forget me, as if that was possible. Anyway, I'm not sure how you're going to send me a reply, but you're a resourceful shithead, so I know you'll find a way. Speaking of which, how did you like the Falcon? Badass, isn't it? Gaara gave me the summoning contract before I left. It took some getting used to, and the boss summon is a total bitch, but eventually I slapped him around enough to get what I wanted. I hope you're having fun wherever you are and you're staying safe. I want my boyfriend in one fucking piece when I see him next. Sorry about how long I took to send this. When I said Sasori was paranoid, I wasn't fucking kidding. This was the first chance I got on a solo mission. I'm not totally sure how long these stupid things are supposed to be, but I guess this works, so I'll stop. I miss you, Naruto. Can't wait to see you again. Your smoking hot girlfriend, Tayuya. A warm smile lit up Naruto's face as he read the message from the girl he loved. It was just to Tayuya that it brought back a lot of warm memories. He also laughed a little at what she wrote at the end. If he didn't know any better, she sounded like she was taking after Anko. Naruto almost shuddered at the thought. Tayuya was unpredictable enough without throwing the healthy amount of sadism that was Anko Mitarashi. He thought about what she said. It seemed her mission was going well, which was good. He had worried a lot over that, but pointlessly it seemed. It was also good that she was so easily able to get the Akatsuki, or at least Sasori, to trust her. He wondered what types of mission they had her going on. She didn't clarify in the letter, so he was curious. He shrugged, thinking it would just be one of the things he could ask when he sent his reply. He also wondered about that, thinking of just how he could do such a thing. She appeared to have faith in him in that regard. He had a Fujin no Ikki seal placed on her, of course, one of the more long-lasting ones that would last him the training trip. Even so, he didn't think just flashing in would be a good idea, especially if she was in a compromising situation. He also didn't know where she was. The jump could be rather large. He still didn't fully understand the limitations of his own jutsu and wouldn't risk chakra depletion. However, he might be able to do it for something like a scroll, just send it along the seal instead of himself. It wouldn't work with his current setup. The entrance seal was on his body and designed for him. He could write out another entrance seal and temporarily connect it to Tayuya's using his own as a base template. His mind began whirling through the various ways he would have to modify it before it ground to halt, realizing he still needed something to send through in the first place. By this point, Fu had snatched the scroll out of her brother's hands in his distracted state, reading it over thoroughly. Naruto had told her a lot about Tayuya, and she was rather excited to get her first glimpse of what the girl was like for herself. She couldn't glean all that much from the letter, but the girl seemed confident and happy when talking about Naruto, and Fu was glad about that. It was important to her that Naruto was happy, and if his girlfriend wasn't good for him, then Fu wouldn't have minded speaking up. Just then she noticed a small seal at the bottom corner of the scroll that Naruto must have overlooked in his haste. Remembering what Naruto had told her about Fuinjutsu, she channeled chakra into her hand and placed it against the seal. There was a small puff of white smoke that erupted from the seal, which was enough to break Naruto out of his thoughts. He looked over in time to see Fu holding onto a small stack of Polaroids, eyeing them curiously before her eyes went wide. "I'll take those, Fu." He quickly snatched the photos out of Fu's hand, looking at her slightly shocked face. When he looked down at the first picture, he realized why, and his own eyes widened slightly. Tayuya was stood in front of the camera in a pose with her hips slightly out to her right while her left hand was up in a peace sign. Her right hand was clutching her own ass as she bent towards the camera, managing to show off some recently gained cleavage in the tight two-piece red bikini she was wearing. Where did she get that bikini? Wait, who the hell is holding the camera? He found that he was incredibly angry at the thought of somebody else seeing Tayuya like that when the photos were supposed to be for him. He sheepishly looked over at Fu, who still looked a little shell-shocked, holding her hand out like the photos were still in it. "So that was Tayuya, what do you think?" He had tried to make the question sound casual but failed miserably. Fu just turned to look at him, somewhat recovering after the silence was broken. "She seems, really pretty." Naruto smiled at her, wrapping an arm around the young girl's shoulders. "She would be really happy to meet you. I bet the two of you would get along great." Fu just nodded meekly, her pre-adolescent mind still confused about what she had seen. "Onisan, why did she send pictures like that?" Naruto just chuckled nervously, looking over at Yugito in the doorway of the kitchen. She was now looking at them both strangely, or more precisely the photos in Naruto's hand. "It's a boyfriend-girlfriend thing. You'll understand when you get a little older." Fu pouted cutely at that, wanting to understand now, as all children did when confronted with that line. Yugito now seemed even more interested, walking over and attempting to take the photos from Naruto, who skillfully diverted his hand away from her. She tried again, and once again Naruto moved his hands out of reach. By now Fu had gotten over her confusion and slight embarrassment and was just curious. The two girls suddenly ganged up on him in an attempt to get the photos away from him. That was the scene B walked in on, Naruto standing on his toes with his arm in the air with Fu on his back and Yugito pressed up against his front, also trying to reach for the photos. B's eyes widened in surprise, his sunglasses nearly falling off his face at the seemingly compromising position. He walked into the room with years' worth of stealth training and quickly grabbed the photos for himself to see what all the fuss was about. His sunglasses actually did fall off his face when he looked at them, revealing a set of deep chocolate eyes. He laughed and gave an appreciative whistle looking at them. "Man Lil, 9, your girlfriend looks mighty fine, even the killer bee couldn't keep away from such a honey." He punctuated his rap with arm movements that only made Naruto annoyed. The large man had the gall to flip through the photos when Naruto had only seen the first one. He growled in annoyance and snatched the Polaroids back before B could go through any more and hurriedly stuffed them into his jacket pocket. "Viewing time's over, those are supposed to be between me and Tayuya." All three of them caught the irritation in his voice and smiled nervously. "Come on, Onisan, we were just curious. You tell us so much about Tayuya but we've never actually seen her." Naruto just smiled warmly, the irritation melting from his features at his little sister's voice. "Don't worry, Fu, only a year and then you can see her for yourself." The girl smiled a little at that, still upset that Naruto was hiding the pictures from her and wouldn't explain why. She remembered how the girl in the photo had looked wearing the bikini. She did have to admit the girl was beautiful. She looked down at herself, specifically her chest, and wondered why she couldn't look more like that. The other girl actually filled out the bikini she wore, but Fu didn't have anything there. She had once brought the concern up with Yugito, but the older Jinchuriki just told her to wait. Naruto missed her concerned look and made to leave the room. He wanted to write up his reply, worrying about how he would send it later. Before he could though, he felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see B standing behind him with his arms crossed. "Yo 9, I ain't got much time, so listen to my rhyme. Bro sent me to tell you that you and little Fu got a skidoo." Naruto just looked at his teacher and friend confusedly, wondering what he meant. "The rakeage is kicking me out of Kumo." B quickly shook his head, not very happy that his rhymes weren't clear enough when in his head they made perfect sense. "Nor, bro loves you and little Miss 7, having you here is like our own slicer, heaven." That was exaggerating a bit, but B had trouble with the number 7. "You spent too much time here, so now you gotta get clear before Akatsuki get near." "Oh yeah." He finished with his arms crossed over his chest as his head bobbed a little to the beat only he could hear. Naruto just looked downhearted. He realized he would have to leave eventually, but he had genuinely enjoyed his time in Kumo. He had made great friends. He had also reached a new level in his training, but he was promised by B that he would get a few scrolls to further his lightning affinity when he left. How long do we have? B just nodded understandingly, his hand on Naruto's shoulder almost protectively. Bro says you gotta pack up and go before those Biju snatchers get ready to blow. He gave Jarl a week until you got sneak and make sure yo rhymes a freak, yeah. Naruto nodded. By now B's raps were like second nature to him and he could understand the man better than most. Thanks B, it was cool hanging around here for so long. He looked over at Fu with a smile. She also looked sad at their forced departure. I guess it's time we found somewhere new to make friends, Imuoto. Time for a new adventure, I guess. The younger girl smiled. Naruto had a habit of getting them out of her even when she was sad. What about my Jinchuriki training? Yugito had stayed silent until now, but she knew this departure would be hard on Fu. If she was honest, she didn't particularly like it either. The girl had become almost family to her. Don't worry about it, Fu. Naruto's got it down pretty good and he knows what to do to keep improving. I'm sure he'll help you through the next year. Anyway, when this is all over, me and B will still be here to train you. She said it with a reassuring smile that was more pretense and false bravado than anything. Yugito knew better than most that a shinobi's life was uncertain at the best of times, but she valued Fu's innocence. Fu brightened again at her combined sister, best friend, and teacher comforted her. Thanks, Onizen. She ran over and wrapped Yugito up in a warm hug which made the older girl blush a little before patting her on the back. It's alright, Fu, we still have a few days before you and Naruto leave. We'll just have to make the most of them. Fu nodded energetically, back to her usual cheerful self as she thought of all the things she still wanted to do with her friends in Kumo. Naruto also smiled at the scene. He was definitely going to miss all of this, especially the friends they had both made. B, Yugito, Simui, Omoi, Karui, Mabui, and the Reikage. B chose that moment to leave, his message delivered and a large pile of food waiting for him back home. Yugito retired back into the kitchen to finish off what she was cooking while Fu flopped down on the couch, taking in everything again. Naruto slipped out of the room silently, moving towards his bedroom so he could write up a reply to Tayuya's letter that had caused so much havoc. He walked in and sent down a fresh scroll on his desk. Plenty were lying around from his fuinjutsu studies. He grabbed an ink brush, set a smirk on his face and went about writing back. Tayuya swung lazily in the hammock she had strung up between two pillars in the small room she had been given. She was smiling, just thinking about various things with her hands back under her head and her long red hair strewn across her eyes. An observant ninja might just spot her ears twitching every now and then as she listened out for early warnings of her soon-to-be arrival. Sasori had sent her to this bunker to meet up with some informant or another. He always sent her because he was too paranoid to go himself. Tayuya's didn't mind all that much. The bunkers were always nice and quiet. She could think clearly about things here that she couldn't when around her boss. She may have despised Sasori in so many ways ever since they had first been introduced by one of his higher subordinates, but that didn't stop the girl from admiring him somewhat. He ran a tight organization, herself not included, that ran like clockwork. He had a steady stream of informants bringing him information from across the nations where it would filter back up the ranks to him. The same could not be said for his moron of a partner. When Tayuya was around, the two were always bickering like children. It would be over some inane topic like whose art was better or why they were given the task of certain Jinchuriki. That was another reason Tayuya despised Deodara. He was assigned to the Ichibi, Gaara, and she would make sure that would never happen. She would rip off his creepy-ass mouth hands before they could even gasp in surprise. The first time they had met, the man tried to offer her a small sculpture of herself made out of his patented clay. While she admitted it was a good likeness, she still didn't want to touch it, knowing that the clay came out of mouths in his hands. Sure enough, when she did touch it, it was slightly damp and she immediately dropped it. That forced everybody to dive out of the way as the small statue exploded on contact with the ground. Yep, she hated him all right. That wasn't to say it was all bad. For a lot of the time Tayuya was essentially left to her own devices with some of Sasori's other subordinates not too far away. Unless of course she was specifically set a task or mission like she was currently. She huffed in annoyance. The informant was supposed to be here already and the generally damp of the bunker was getting on her nerves. She stood to stretch her neck a little, but as she did so she felt her hip warm up suddenly. It felt tingly like whenever Naruto would use the Fujin no Iki on her. To her surprise, a scroll suddenly just popped into existence to her side and on reflex she caught it. Glancing at the scroll briefly, she lifted up her shirt to the side to see why he had felt strange. She caught the complicated seal right before it faded back into her skin, unseen again. Shithead, you sneaky bastard, I didn't even notice you put that on me. She smirked to herself. When she had written that he would find a way, she hadn't expected it so soon. Her summon had only returned yesterday to tell her the message was received by a spiky blonde-haired kid she had described. She looked down at the scroll again and giggled uncharacteristically. She couldn't help being excited at the first word from her boyfriend in 10 months. She was curious as to what he had been up to. The training trip had sounded interesting before he even left, and Tayuya had to admit she was a little jealous. Without more delay, she rushed over to a nearby raised platform and laid the scroll out, pulling a candle over for better light. Dear Tayuya-chan, I'm glad you finally wrote. I was getting worried that something had happened on your mission. Not that I didn't think you would do well, but I care about you and I can't help but worry. You're right about the time feeling much longer than it is, but I think your photos will help me keep going. Thanks for those, by the way. They caused a lot of trouble when I unsealed them. I guess I should answer your questions first. Yeah, you're right. It's weird that you're practically working for Akatsuki. I know it's all undercover, but it's still strange to think about. I'm glad you're doing so well and happy that you're causing trouble for Akatsuki. That always helps. The Falcon summon was cool, but I swear it was trying to gouge my eyes out when it delivered your letter. I guess I should fill you in on what's happened so far. When I left sooner, I went to Takagakure. There I met another Jinchuriki, Fu. She's younger than us, 12 now that her birthday's gone by, and she took to me well. She's like a little sister now, and I can't wait for you to meet her. You'll love her as much as I do. I know it. After that, we both went to Kumo and made even more friends. I met the Raikage. He's huge. There's B-sensei. He raps a lot, but he's a good teacher and helped me with my lightning affinity and controlling Kyuubi's chakra. Oh, that's another thing. Kyuubi has a name, Kurama. How strange was it that I didn't know that? Next there's Yugito. She helped Fu with her own training and we became friends as well. Both of them are Jinchuriki too. I never thought I would meet so many. There's also Samui, Omoi and Karui. They're fun to hang out with but really good shinobi as well. Kumo's a lot different from home, but it's got its good parts. I miss you and the familiar deserts though. I'm not sure what else to write because I want to tell the rest to you personally. I really hope my reverse Fujin no Iki worked, otherwise all this writing will have been for nothing. I guess I'll find out in your next letter. Can't wait. The one and only, Naruto Uzumaki. Tayuya grinned at the letter. It was good to hear from Naruto again, even if it was just in letter form. She noticed the small seal pressed tightly into the bottom of the scroll and quickly flashed her chakra through it. She was a little disappointed when only a single photo emerged. She had hoped for something more like what she sent him, but she figured it wasn't really Naruto's style. She peered at the photo in the dim candlelight and smiled softly when she realized it was a group shot. She could plainly see Naruto in the middle, flanked by a load of people Tayuya had never seen before. She was surprised at how much Naruto had grown in the brief time he was away. His face seemed thinner and more defined, and the spikes in his hair were longer, as were his usual bangs. In front of him was a younger girl Tayuya immediately figured was Fu. She smiled at the warm way Naruto held her shoulders, both smiling into the camera. Behind him was the only person she could think of to be Naruto's sensei. She marveled for a few moments at how large the man was as well as how powerful he seemed to be, even in 2D. To his right was a girl Tayuya took a shot at as Yugito, and she immediately scowled at how close the girl was to Naruto. She trusted her blonde boyfriend, but she wasn't really experienced at controlling jealousy and felt a wave of possessiveness. She scowled even deeper when she looked to Naruto's right and saw the blonde-haired girl between her two teammates. She didn't know if it was Samui or Karui, but she didn't like her. She sulked as she looked down at her own chest. While it wasn't anything to be ashamed of, it wasn't near the blonde girl's impressive bust. Other than that though, she had to feel happy that Naruto had made some friends and even a sister in his time away. From the sounds of it, he was also getting stronger, and she hoped to pit herself against him when they next met. She was pulled from her thoughts as something fluttered down from the group photo, a single smaller Polaroid which she quickly caught. Flipping it over, she grinned at what she saw. That's more like it, Naruto. I'll admit the orange looks good on the swimming trunks. Her sensitive ears picked up the sounds of somebody entering the bunker, and she quickly threw both photos and the scroll into her duffel bag over in the corner. She turned back just as the lanky dark-haired informant ducked into her room. It's about time you showed up. Like Master Sasori, I hate being kept waiting. Now I understand. I was called here because you had some information on the civil war in Kirigakure. So where are you guys going to go? Naruto stood at the gates of Kumo next to Fu as they looked at the friends they had made. It was Yugito who asked the question, and even Fu seemed interested as she turned her head. Naruto just rubbed the back of his head and looked at the sky, one cloud in particular catching his attention as it lazily drifted along. I dunno really, I guess I had a lot of time to think about it. I think I'm going to go down to Wave Country. Everybody assembled looked at him curiously, and it was Karui who voiced the shared thoughts. Why the hell would you go there? They don't even have a shinobi village. What could you possibly hope to learn? Naruto shrugged absently, which riled up the dark-skinned redhead. He had gotten slightly laid back during his time in Kumo. His reflexes and alertness were still as sharp as ever, but his attitude as a whole had really calmed down, mostly thanks to Yugito's intervention. In all, he had rather mellowed out from the hyperactive boy he had been a few years ago. I had a mission there once to observe a Konoha genin team. They were protecting some bridge builder from the local tyrant. He had the entire island under his thumb, and the people were pretty destitute, living out of what could barely be called houses. On that mission we killed the tyrant because he would have killed the team we were observing otherwise. I wanted to go and see how the place was doing, as well as pay my respects to someone I met there. Everybody nodded to his answer. It wasn't training but a personal reason. After that, I dunno. Konoha's pretty close to Wave, so I guess I could drop in with Tsunade, see what's happening. Fu seemed excited by that. She had read a lot in Kumo and was excited to be visiting the greatest of the shinobi villages, even if Naruto didn't seem entirely comfortable with the idea himself. He knew that personal feelings had to be put aside though, so that he could further his training. It would also be pretty good to drop in on Anko and Hana after a year, see if they still even remembered him. He chuckled to himself. He figured he had made a pretty deep impression. They waved the goodbyes as Fu hugged each and every one of them, even earning the smallest of smiles from the stoic Simui. Pretty soon they were away from Kumo, heading back towards the coldness of the land of frost that was the only way out of lightning country to the south. He wasn't exactly looking forward to another trek through the snow, but he gritted his teeth and walked anyway. He stopped at the edge of a forest and turned to Fu with a grin. Are you ready? The girl nodded excitedly, and he just smiled before both of them leaped into the trees. At least this time their journey would be shorter. Naruto smiled as he looked out over the bridge. He remembered it being big from his last visit, but this just reaffirmed it. He felt proud to have seen so many national monuments in his short time. The Hokage Monument, Tsunade's walls, Kumo's tower, Taki's tree, and now this. When they had left, it had still been incomplete, but now it stood in all its glory for the world to see. The Subarashi Suna no Roppu Bridge. It's kind of fitting, I guess. Fu didn't know what Naruto was talking about. She was too busy gawking at the immense piece of masonry before her. It's so big. Naruto just chuckled and ruffled Fu's hair, making her grumble before they walked down onto the bridge itself. Naruto was happy to see various stalls set up along its length with various vendors peddling the goods to passersby. They seemed to be doing well, which made Naruto feel happy he could have helped in this. Technically it was Gaara who killed Gato, but Naruto would have done it in a heartbeat if his friend hadn't beaten him to it. Further into the nation they could tell that Naruto's earlier assessments were correct and Wave was positively booming with business. People roamed the streets with smiles on their faces and fear out of their hearts. Their oppression had been lifted and children were happily running through the streets as opposed to being forced to beg at their sides. Naruto still remembered that little girl Aja who was begging for food when they had arrived in Wave. He had given her his rations for the next few weeks, knowing that he could always hunt for more food. He idly wondered what had become of her, if she was among these playing kids enjoying her youth, or was he too late? He shook his head of the thoughts. He knew as a shinobi he couldn't save everyone, but he could always try his best, and that was what was important. He smiled at Fu, who just looked at him oddly, wondering what her older brother was thinking about as they moved through the seaside town. Come on, we should go find an inn or something to get rooms for the night. Fu nodded her head in agreement, but her stomach growled out its disapproval. They hadn't eaten since lunch and even Naruto was feeling his stomach ache. Right after we get something to eat, Fu nodded more graciously this time as Naruto led her to the port. There were always a few restaurants around there for the sailors. Naruto checked out the potential restaurants, trying to find something that caught his eye. Fu on the other hand was distracted. She was intently watching a single dragonfly as it zipped around her head hypnotically. She had a smile on her face as she merely observed the nimble insect, finding calmness through its seemingly erratic movements. When it zipped off, it just returned before zipping off in the same direction. It actually repeated this a few times and Fu watched, fascinated as the insect seemed to want her to follow it. Temporarily forgetting about Naruto, she lazily followed the insect. She was still alert and wouldn't stay too far from Naruto, but something about the dragonfly caught her attention. She followed it along the pier a bit until it stopped above a simple, unassuming boat. It hovered above its metal deck, just zipping to and fro but never leaving its confines. By now Fu was positively enraptured by its seemingly thought-out movements. They looked so precise and agile. With a single hop she was up on the deck of the ship, her feet making the barest of clangs against the weather-beaten metal. Before she could reach out and try to ensnare the fast insect, she felt a strong hand on her shoulder. She looked around quite suddenly to see Naruto staring at her with a stern expression. She immediately looked down guiltily. She had run away from him and he must have been worried and come found her. Fu, what do you think? Naruto couldn't get any farther. He had let down his guard in Fu's absence, caution replaced by panic, and now he was paying for it. Without any drama he felt something strike the back of his head before his vision went funny and he blacked out. What do you mean you lost him? The voice held no irritation or anger. It was as unemotional and impassive as the face and body that conveyed it, however distorted by the hologram-like effect. I apologize, Leader Sama. We were trailing the boy through the land of waves when he suddenly dropped off our radar. Ever since the Kyuubi Jinchuriki departed Kumogakure, his abilities to suppress his own chakra have become commendable. I believe it has something to do with seals. Even so, we should not have lost him completely like this. It is now more than likely he has vacated the country and we cannot do anything further without knowing where he ends up. The impassive holographic figure just stood, staring into space with his ringed eyes as he thought. Very well, this setback is nothing too important. We still have a year and a half before the plan is set in motion properly, and to that effect I will have Sasori devote some of his resources to relocating the Kyuubi. As for you two, it would be against logic to put your talents to waste, so I'm tasking you with locating the Nanabe Jinchuriki. She was one of the ones planned for initial early capture, yet she seems to have disappeared almost similarly to the Kyuubi. Both Itachi and Kisame bowed deeply to the hologram. Of course, Leader Sama, we won't fail you. The man merely narrowed his eyes, the already intimidating sight gaining some credibility. See that you don't. The hologram promptly faded from view, leaving both Akatsuki members alone in the cavern just off the coast of the Land of Waves. Kisame let out a loud sigh of relief. He was a fierce opponent, but the leader always freaked him out. Every member of the Akatsuki knew what he could do and nobody was willing to pit themselves against that. How the hell are we supposed to track down the Nanabe? Isn't that something better suited for Zetsu or Sasori? Itachi sent a cold gaze at his partner. He liked to think his patience was extensive, but the unobtrusive man tended to grind on the ex-Anbu captain. Sasori is not the only one with contacts. Kisame, now shut up and let's go. We might as well look around Takagakure for a lead. Kisame just nodded at his partner, his shark-like grin never leaving his face for a moment. It was almost painted on. For a brief moment, as his eyelids fluttered from the flash of lighting out of a window, Naruto wondered if this was what being drunk felt like. His head was fuzzy and unfocused, he couldn't really control his limbs in the way he wanted, and he had a splitting headache that was threatening to force him back into unconsciousness. He groaned, alerting the silhouette of a man who had been watching over him to his awakening. "Ha, the kid's up already. Figured you'd be out longer with a blow like that, even if you were a shinobi." Naruto's eyes took a moment to focus on the man. Once he stepped out of the shadow in the corner of the room anyway. He managed another incomprehensible groan before his head flopped back down again. He felt weak and cold and he couldn't explain it. His body was heavy and unresponsive and he couldn't even feel his chakra flow. What's going on? His speech was just slightly slurred from his dazed state, and the man standing across from him just laughed at his poor attempt. That's the least of your worries now, kid. You should be more concerned with what's already happened. Naruto was still confused and not completely focused, so he just ended up staring at the man oddly, which only caused him to laugh even more. You shinobi and your fucking chakra, without it you're barely anything at all, are you? Naruto's eyes desperately tried to gain focus as he looked down at himself. He quickly realized he was tightly bound to a pillar-like structure in a room that was swaying. He came to the conclusion he was on a boat and the movement of the ocean was doing nothing to help his dizziness. Don't try to channel one of your precious techniques. That seal on your arm almost completely cuts you off from chakra. It's based off the thing they use in Hazukijo prison. Sure enough, Naruto looked around and saw a complex seal around his arm that looked strangely like a chain. It explained where the nausea and general weakness were coming from. As somebody with naturally high amounts of chakra, he was used to it constantly flooding his system. Now he was receiving severe withdrawal symptoms. It was almost like chakra exhaustion without the sweet release of unconsciousness, and it was drawn out. Where's Fu? It was the first coherent thought that made it to his mouth, and he almost seemed to gargle through it. The large man only chuckled, looking toward the door of the fairly small cabin they were both in. The little brat with the funky hair color. Oh, she's long gone. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he felt his blood boil. Even with the seal in place, he could feel Kyuubi's chakra practically writhing behind the barrier that had been suddenly placed upon it, begging for release. What did you do to her? Naruto coughed up blood as the man's steel-toed boot promptly met the side of his face, sending waves of pain through his body. Getting a little forward, aren't we? You're in no position to be talking to me like that, kid. The only reason you're even alive is because we wanted to see if you have some kind of bounty on you. The room fell silent again as Naruto checked to see he hadn't lost any teeth while the man returned to his corner, although his smirk was still visible. If you must know, I assume she's on one of the slave ships bound for water country. People that take a ride on those tubs don't ever come back. He was positively grinning now, which made Naruto bite down his angry outburst. Somebody finally entered the room through the small cabin door, and the man's grin turned a bit more businesslike. The barely hidden glee was still visible though. The new arrival quickly handed the man before him a small leather-bound book before quickly departing, never even glancing at Naruto once. The first man just idly flicked through the book, taking time to compare certain photos with the blonde before him until he reached the last page. Well, seems that there isn't a single mention of you anywhere. Either this book is outdated or you're a shitty ninja. Either way, you have no further use to me. He clapped once and instantly a few more men, sailors by the looks of it, hurried into the room, quickly untied Naruto and slung him between them. Normally Naruto would have tried to struggle or escape, but he felt constantly exhausted with the seal placed on him. Right now the blonde had difficulty speaking, never mind coming up with a decent strategy for escaping that required he overpowered 3 burly men without the use of chakra. The rain stung and slashed at his face as the men carried him out onto the metal deck that overflowed with water. A storm was brewing high overhead, and in the distance the ominous crashes of thunder could be heard. Below them the sea churned and boiled in petulance for the sky upstaging it, and it attempted to relive its anger on the small boat. The sailors seemed unfazed, going about their business and maintaining the ship's course with a practiced ease. Naruto was more concerned with the fact they were carrying him closer to the edge of the ship, closer to the thrashing waves that gleamed from a lightning strike, almost in anticipation. Without more than a word, the men dumped Naruto's body unceremoniously into the swirling void of the sea, the salty waters swallowing him instantly. With fervor and panic, Naruto tried to get his body to respond enough to swim upwards. It was fruitless, he was too drained and he couldn't use his ninja techniques. He had managed to grab a lungful of air before his hasty departure, so at least he wasn't sinking too far. However, he was still at the unbidden mercy of the tumultuous seas, tossed around like a piece of kelp trapped in an eddy. Naruto's lungs began to burn from the lack of oxygen reaching his body, and in one last attempt he kicked his legs wildly. With an enormous gasp for air, the resilient blonde resurfaced and panted, using his barely functional legs to keep him afloat as long as he could. He looked around, but it was a little difficult to spot anything with the storm raging on around him and the darkness of the light. He thought he spotted some kind of land mass off in the distance, but he could have been imagining it. He kicked a few more times, but his energy was finally completely drained. At that moment, a larger than normal wave grabbed onto Naruto, pulling him with it as he was tugged towards shore by some invisible force. It was almost as if the water had a grip on his body and was actually bringing him somewhere. His usually curious mind left the question blank as he continued to struggle for even the smallest breaths of oxygen he could manage. He felt his eyelids droop, and there couldn't have been a worse moment for his body to catch up to him. Darkness encroached on his vision even as bubbles and swirling blue waters rushed over his head, completely blocking out the light of the storm above. Fu once again fought the urge to struggle against the itchy bindings that kept her hands from being used. Naruto had long ago told her how to escape such poorly made ties, but that wasn't her problem. That lay in the 20 or so men that stood as escort, slowly marching the small group of people through the silent forest. She had a heavy canvas bag over her head which made it both difficult to breathe and hear. A few of her fellow prisoners had already passed out a few times. Before she had been sufficiently bound and covered, she had managed to see a fair few of the others branded with some kind of chain-like seal which seemed to block off the chakra. She had only been spared because nobody even suspected she had any training as a shinobi, mostly under the assumption that because she didn't wear a headband she wasn't a shinobi. She had actually been offered a forehead protector in Kumo, but Naruto had declined for her, only telling her that he had a surprise for her later. She didn't realize that it would save her life like it had now, as it was she was able to easily keep up with the rather mediocre pace the slavers, or whoever they were, set. She had been slowly loosening the rope around her wrist to the point where with a single flick of her wrist they would fall to the ground. She figured it would be best to escape from these men before they reached wherever it was they were going. These were just foot soldiers, that much was obvious, just grunts to carry out the menial labor. There was surely somebody more powerful behind an operation like this, especially somebody who had access to seals as complex as something she might have seen Naruto working on. Her thoughts drifted to her brother. She had seen him get knocked out on the boat because he let down his guard, all because of her. She had fallen for the simplest of genjutsu used to lure in potential targets and incapacitate them before they even knew what was happening. She had fallen for it hook, line and sinker, and now she didn't even know where Naruto was. She knew he would come for her. He was her brother and the first person to ever truly show her kindness, and to such a degree that she wouldn't have thought imaginable before. Even through her confidence, though she had nagging doubts, because of her incompetence her Onisan might be dead, or sealed with that mark and in a similar situation to her own. For all she knew he was in the very same group as her, equally bound and restrained. It didn't seem likely to her. The Naruto she knew would have already found a counter for the seal, broken his bonds and dealt with all the guards present before even one of them could mutter, "What?" Her head fell forward again. She was useless in comparison. Even if she escaped these bonds and her captors, she could do nothing for these poor people in the same situation. Beneath the canvas bag her eyes hardened until the orange of her irises encroached on a menacing red. She wouldn't let her brother down like that. Abandoning all these people to their fates would make her no better than the people currently leading them further into the forest. A grin formed on her impish features as a plan began to circulate her mind, a mind slowly molded into one of a dangerous prankster by the Kyuubi Jinchuriki himself. It was surprising what the practical applications of a simple prank could do. Planning, organization, forethought, skill, all requirements to pull off the perfect prank, or in her case, the perfect escape. Naruto's eyes refused to obey him. No matter how much he sent the mental command to the muscles in his face, his eyelids wouldn't lift. He was being carried, that much was obvious from the strange orientation of his body and the slight bobbing motion of his carrier's gait. He had woken up a few minutes ago, actually moderately surprised that he wasn't dead, unless this was the afterlife. In that case it sucked. The last thing he remembered was the sight of the waters overtaking his head as he slowly drifted down into the crushing depths of the ocean. It would appear somebody either saw fit to rescue him, which would make him curious to their intentions, or he had the good luck to wash up on a shore somewhere. He had an inkling it was the former. Naruto and good luck just didn't mix. His mission history was testament to that fact, unless of course it concerned gambling, then it was a whole different story. Giving up on his eyes for now, he focused on the more pressing matter of the seal on his arm blocking his chakra. It was no wonder he felt so positively drained. He couldn't access his countless reserves at all, not a drop. Not even the fox's chakra could breach this ripoff of a prison sealing jutsu. Naruto knew all too well of Hazukijo prison and their infamous sealing technique. It had been an area of rapt study during his time in Kumo. He only hoped that it came without the small clause of incinerating the subject if the applier got too far away. He groaned without meaning to, the feeling of emptiness inside of him so foreign and unnatural that he had the urge to throw up. His savior, or kidnapper as the case might turn out, stopped and quickly set Naruto down against a tree, checking him over again after the groan. With a great deal of effort, Naruto's eyes managed to finally grind open and stare blurrily into the face of the man who saved him. It took a moment for his features to come into focus, but Naruto could see a face with eyes weary of battle, one with a large scar running vertically through it. He had a well-groomed beard that curved around to almost form a mustache, and the rest of his features were masked by a hood. He wore a Kirigakure headband which thankfully did not bear the slash of a missing nin, although with the mist's reputation that still might be bad for Naruto. Are you alright? There wasn't much sympathy or compassion in the man's voice. He asked more to make sure that carrying him all this way hadn't been a waste of time. Naruto nodded in response, standing after a moment to deal with his dizziness and the lack of chakra. Where am I? His voice was hoarse and dry, and the man who had saved him quickly pulled out a canteen of water which Naruto happily drank. We are currently en route through the land of water to one of the outlying bases so that somebody can assess you, so that my superiors can make a decision regarding your future. Naruto gulped a little. It didn't sound all that friendly, and he had to wonder what these bases were used for. As if reading his mind, the grizzled man just continued. I am a part of the current rebel forces that are seeking to overthrow our tyrant of a cage, Yagura. He spat the name quite literally into the damp grass beside him. Naruto just took in the information. He was now in water country somehow. He knew it wasn't too far from Wave, but it was still a long way off. Not only that, but he had managed to stumble right into the middle of a civil war that would determine the fate of the land of water for years. Nope. Naruto and luck just didn't fit together. His eyes widened in realization. Foo. It was a harsh whisper as his throat was still parched, but the man seemed to understand the sentiment behind the cry. I'm sorry, but I did not detect anybody else out in the waters. You were lucky I was even able to find you at all. Maybe you should thank Mei-sama for tasking me with a mission so close to the coast. Naruto didn't know who Mei was, but he was certainly going to thank them graciously. His head fell as he absorbed what the man had told him, that Fu hadn't been with him. He already knew that in a way, the men who had placed the seal told him she was on a different ship. As if he could once again read Naruto's mind, the older man calmly spoke up. I wouldn't be worried. If your friend was also taken by the thugs, then they are most likely in captivity on their way to one of the slave camps dotted around the country. Our organization runs raids on them occasionally to put Yagura off balance. There is a small probability that they could be recovered. Naruto's eyes hardened into slits. Once he got this damn seal off, then he would go after Fu himself. Corrupt cage be damned. My name is Tsurugi, by the way. If you are able to move, then I suggest we get going again. It is unwise to be standing around so idle while not in the safety of our bases. Naruto just nodded, taking a shaky first step forward before he managed to get his bearings and jogged after Tsurugi. It was infuriating not being able to use his chakra to bounce through the trees like he normally would. Without it, he was forced to rely on his rather unresponsive and sluggish muscles, which by a civilian's standard was still fast, but this was the pace academy students in Suna could move at. I must ask, because I am curious, why did those thugs attack you and brand you with the seal only to throw you overboard? They had been running in silence for a while now, Naruto having to rely on the other man to lead him through unfamiliar territory. As far as I am aware, they saved that seal for the bloodline uses they managed to capture in order to subdue them. Do you hold a bloodline? Naruto shook his head as he ran and almost laughed to himself. He carried something very different in his blood. He had noticed that as well. Without his chakra acting as an intermediary between them, Kyuubi hadn't said a word since he woke up. He figured he probably wouldn't be able to access his mindscape either until the dam binding came off, and that was why he had spent the last hour studying his arm and figuring out ways of countering or removing it. He used to be a veritable stamina powerhouse. Now, without a single drop of chakra coursing through him, he found even this distance beginning to wear on him. No, I do not know why they targeted me or Fu, but I think she may have been in some kind of genjutsu that lead her away from me onto their boat. They knocked me out, and when I woke up the seal was already on me. When they found out I wasn't in the bingo books, they threw me overboard. It was probably so they didn't have another mouth to feed, plus I would have caused them a lot of trouble. He smirked a little at that. No bonds had ever held him for very long, and this seal would be no different. Strange, it isn't like the thugs under Yagura's employ to get rid of such an ideal prisoner, shinobi or not. Perhaps this speaks of instability within their ranks. I will have to inform Mae-sama of this when we return. Naruto just sighed as the man picked up his pace, forcing Naruto to drag his weary and lethargic body after him. They stopped a short while later, much to Naruto's thanks, although he couldn't work out the reason. They had branched off from the main path a while ago and had been steadily making their way through scrubland for the past hour. Tsurugi just seemed to stop at random, searching with his eyes for something Naruto couldn't see because he didn't know where to look. Finally, the other man's eyes settled on a small yellowed rock that seemed a little out of place amongst its brothers. He picked it up, revealing the seal on the flip side, which he quickly poured chakra into. Before them, the ground opened up with a dull groan of rock and earth parting to reveal a rough-hewn staircase leading down into what Naruto guessed was the rebel base. Tsurugi wasted no time in pushing Naruto down the steps before himself following, sealing the exit behind him as torches flared into life on either side. Naruto looked down the long passageway that had been opened to them and groaned. More walking. The small convoy had stopped for the night. Even slavers knew that running their prisoners into the ground wasn't exactly beneficial and they needed rest as well. They slept while a smaller contingent of 5 thugs watched the prisoners, rotating in shifts every few hours or so. In that time, Fu had managed to subtly move around the clearing that the prisoners were resting in, spreading her plan to all who would listen. In that time, she had also managed to find out more about just what was going on. Most of these people were bloodline users, or at least had been until their chakra was sealed away. They had been rounded up in a sort of purge ordered by Kirigaku's Mizukage himself and ordered into various slave camps dotting the nation. Fu had been disgusted by this. It was the highest form of xenophobia and bigotry she could think of, almost reminiscent of the way Jinchuriki are treated. Apparently the Mizukage feared the power of the bloodline users, becoming paranoid in his reign. The village was already known as the Bloody Mist village by then, but Yagura's reign only made it worse. At first it was minor things, a family member disappearing from their house, a few establishments burned down, accidentally. Soon enough through it was a nationwide hunt for anybody with even a trace of a bloodline. That of course led to rebellion when the bloodline users and those that sympathized found out what was going on. That was almost 3 years ago now, and the civil war still rages seemingly endlessly for those involved. With each passing story of families being torn apart and clans being hunted down to the last man, woman or child, Fu's blood boiled hotter. It only hardened her resolve as she stealthily moved about, quickly informing everybody of her plan. There were a few people waiting with bated breath for the guard to rotate their shifts and even more feigning sleep. Finally the moment came and the guards came out to relieve their companions. This now gave them a few hours before the prisoners would be checked on again, and without further delay Fu began. It wasn't a particularly complicated plan. As a matter of fact it was pretty simple, but sometimes the simplest of plans are also the best. As soon as the retiring guards were out of earshot, Fu stood up calmly, attracting the newer guard attention. Sit back down, bloodline scum. Fu just smirked, calmly standing despite having her arms supposedly bound. This better work. I can't really take chances with these people's lives. This was it. Months of training and it had boiled down to a make or break moment like this. The guards sneered at her defiance, storming over with intent to beat it out of her. Fu waited until he was close before she took a deep breath and let them loose. 2 wings sprouted from her back, tinged light green and translucent like a dragonfly's. They astounded everybody, guards and prisoners alike. Fu had only told them she would provide the distraction. She didn't say what it would be. Her guard's momentary hesitation was all she needed, and with a mighty flap from her wings her feet left the earth and took to the skies. Once airborne she finally loosened the ropes around her wrists and rubbed them gingerly. Why doesn't she have the seal? She smirked at the guards' panicked reactions. They ran around like headless chickens, without the training to adapt to such a strange situation. Their disorder was exactly what she needed as she took a deep breath and all the prisoners ducked down, shielding their eyes. With her lungs expanded to capacity, Fu let it all out at once, spreading a fine golden dust across the sky. The particles caught all available light from the moon and the campfires, dispersing it with such increased intensity that most of the thugs griped their heads in pain. Fu just smirked from above them in the sky. She whistled loudly, an ear-splitting sound that pierced the night sky and let all the prisoners know it was time to escape. They rushed to their feet and took off in the direction away from the guards' camp. Fu figured getting away was the priority. Finding somewhere to actually go could come later. The thugs were still on the ground with their hands clasped over their eyes or rubbing them furiously to get their vision back. Fu knew they would be out of commission for about 5 minutes. She had never permanently blinded anybody with the powder she produced. Still in the air, she flew after the fleeing prisoners, making sure to leave behind a few surprises for when the other guards caught up. Her wings fluttered so fast they just appeared to be blurs as they kept her thin body afloat in the air. She couldn't help but be intoxicated. Ever since she found out about her half-transformation, she had tried to be in the sky as much as possible. The only problem was Fu felt herself dip to one side suddenly as her balance was thrown off before her body jerked back upright. Suddenly the same thing happened on the other side before she quickly flew down in a less than graceful display to land on a branch before she completely lost control. Flying was difficult. Her wings weren't a constant thing like Naruto's tails or ears. They were merely things she could summon on a whim without any ill effect from Chomai's chakra. The problem was using them was exhausting. It became easier each time, but she was still left with burning shoulder blades and an aching back. She rushed through the trees, not finding it hard to catch up to the fleeing prisoners considering they were deprived of their chakra. They were all resting in a clearing when she caught up. Apparently even a short run was now difficult for the bloodline users. The only benefit of the seal was that it suppressed their chakra from detection, meaning only Fu had to actively block her own. It wasn't too difficult because flying always took it out of her, and Naruto had already taught her the importance of masking it, especially as a Jinchuriki with so many people after them. She dropped down from a branch, surprising many of the people there who, without their chakra-enhanced senses, felt rather vulnerable. Okay, who knows where we can go to get those seals off of you? She was kind of annoyed with herself for not thinking past this point, as were a few of the people in the clearing if their faces were anything to go on. Luckily she was saved from embarrassment when a man wearing strange earrings, a Kirigakure headband and an eye patch with light blue hair resembling a shark fin put his hand up. I know somewhere we can go. Before Naruto stood an amazingly attractive woman. Her flowing auburn hair cascaded down her back and was split into 4 bangs at the front, 2 covering an eye while the others framed her face down to her cleavage. She wore a grey flak jacket over a dark blue shirt and blue and grey camouflage pants with dark black boots. She gave off the air of a powerful and experienced military leader, and Naruto knew he was looking at the leader of the Kiri rebellion, Mei. Tsurugi, who the hell is this? Naruto felt a large bead of sweat form over his temple. She certainly didn't speak like an accomplished commander. Mei-sama, I rescued this boy off of the coast. He bears the seal of those bloodline users captured by Yagura. The tall woman looked over Naruto only once, preferring to stare at the map in front of her, which seemed to detail the lands outlying Kirigakure. Sorry kid, we don't have any seal masters. Nobody here can remove that for you. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the implication. He also didn't like being constantly referred to as a kid. I don't need one, I could remove it myself if I could access my chakra. All I need is for somebody to channel their chakra into a seal I draw. Mei suddenly lost interest in the map in front of her, turning to stare at Naruto with a smoldering gaze. What's your name, kid? Naruto's eyes twitched again, but he kept his cool like he had practiced for so long. Naruto Uzumaki. Mei's eyebrow raised in surprise before she covered up the display of emotion. Uzumaki. Have you ever heard of somebody named Kushina Uzumaki? Naruto shook his head slowly. Sorry, I've never heard of her. Now he was rather intrigued. This woman said the name like she might have been family. Naruto had never known anything about his family before. Mei just seemed disappointed by the revelation. Sorry, I've never known anything about my family. I was an orphan before I could even remember things. Mei just nodded sadly. Orphans were a common sight now in the land of water. It was one of the reasons she fought so hard. Kid, if you get that seal off, could you do it for others? Naruto nodded while Mei's eyes lit up in joy. Perfect, then what are we waiting for? That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.